The email arrived at 8:47 a.m., clipped and bloodless, the kind of message written to leave no fingerprints. Effective immediately. Your position as Chief Strategy Officer has been eliminated as part of our comprehensive restructuring initiative. No meeting, no phone call, just pixels marching across my screen. I read it twice, the way you reread a diagnosis, hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something kinder. Then close my laptop with the care of someone defusing a bomb that has already gone off. Outside my glass wall, the executive floor hummed with ordinary life, coffee hissing, keyboards ticking, the soft percussion of shoes on polished concrete, while inside, time compressed into a single, precise decision. I would let him finish his performance before I ended the show. He passed my office at 8:52, Tom Ford suit angled perfectly to catch the morning light, a CEO who had learned to wear confidence like a scent. He didn't look in. To him, I was already a ghost. 2 weeks earlier, he had pushed out Rachel from operations. The week before that, he'd pressured Maria from clinical development into a resignation dressed up as opportunity. The pattern was surgical. Question methods in public, interrupt presentations, impose urgent meetings during strategic work, let the small cuts accumulate until the target bled out on their own. The story he told the board was efficiency. The story those of us on this floor heard in the hallways was different. It was about who gets to belong. I took out the leather journal my mentor gave me when I joined Zenith, the one that holds 10 years of meetings and moments and what people say when they're sure no one is listening. I dated the page and wrote only a sentence. He believes the table is his. Then I unlocked the other truth I'd been keeping for 7 years. 53%, quietly held through Carson Group, the investment firm I inherited from my grandmother, dispersed across shell structures designed to stay unseen until they needed to be seen. Power, she told me, isn't what you display, it's what you reserve. I reopened the laptop and sent 2 sentences to my attorney, Margaret Chen. The trigger has been pulled. Please prepare the documentation we discussed. Her reply came back as if she had been waiting with her hand over the send key. Everything is ready. When do you want to move? I typed, Monday, item 7. The rest of the morning, I kept to my routine like a decoy. Stand up with product development. A pass through quarterly projections. A hallway smile for Bryce when our paths crossed, and the line we both understood in different ways. I'm glad you're taking this professionally, he said, the paternal tone of a man who believes civility is submission. Not everyone has your maturity. I've learned to pick my battles, I said. He placed a hand on my shoulder, the gesture of dominance that calls itself reassurance, and moved on, certain the future belonged to him because the slides did. If this were only my story, I might have confronted him in that hallway. But corporations remember their leaders the way cities remember their architects, through structures that last or collapse. I'd watched men like him ride into companies under banners that promised transformation. In the 1990s, they were re-engineering experts. In the 2000s, value unlockers. Now they arrive with PowerPoint hymns to agility and culture fit. The vocabulary changes, the choreography does not. First comes the language of urgency, then the erasure of institutional memory. New regimes prefer clean diagrams. People with long histories complicate them. But medical technology isn't a factory where you can lift and shift the line. It's a web of tacit knowledge, lab notebooks that read like diaries, protocols that live in someone's muscle memory as much as in SOPs. Break continuity, and you don't get speed. You get risk. I returned to my desk and opened the manila folder I kept locked in the bottom drawer. Inside were the pieces he expected no one to collect. Email threads where he mapped a plan to clean house, recorded calls where he laughed about making it uncomfortable enough that they'll select out. Performance reviews edited after decisions were already made. The crown jewel was a private meeting from last Tuesday with 2 board members in which he said, like someone laying bricks for his own tomb, Juliet Carson will be gone before Q2. I'll make sure the board sees her as a liability. They'll thank me for removing her. I didn't need to convince anyone of my value. I needed him to prove his intentions. By noon, condolences filled my inbox. 17, all professionally distant, the way people write when they want to remain human and employed. I answered each with the same tempered sentence about new opportunities. They assumed I meant for myself. In truth, I meant for the company. Monday's board agenda, circulated by Bryce, included Item 7, Personnel Optimization Recommendations. He expected to present a future in which those words meant my absence. He could not imagine that Item 8 would end his role in that future. I packed deliberately, one banker's box, 10 years distilled to a succulent and a handful of photographs. Let him think I was exiting stage right. Let him mistake quiet for defeat. He had done it with every woman he had targeted since he arrived. Outside my window, Denver lifted toward a hard blue sky. This city rewards the people who build quietly and punishes the people who bluff loudly. You can see it in the neighborhoods where old warehouses become labs, in the modest signage on companies that quietly change entire fields. Zenith had grown up in that spirit. It wasn't a brand to flip. It was a lung that breathed because people here had taught it how. There is a mythology around corporate restructurings that pretends they are neutral forces, like weather systems. I have lived long enough inside org charts to know better. They are composed decisions made by specific people at specific tables, manipulating lines on slides that are tethered to rent payments and tuition, and the kind of kitchen calendar logistics that don't show up on EBITDA tables. When someone like Bryce says efficiency, you look for what is being streamlined out. In companies like ours, it's always the slow work of care, onboarding, mentorship, redundancy in critical teams, so vacations don't break pipelines. The work you don't notice until it's gone. In the afternoon, I built a map of his week ahead, not because I feared it, but because maps calm generals. The emergency board meeting was set for Monday at 9. He had stacked it with his showpieces, green arrows, transformation timelines, a future narrated in the tone of inevitability. He did not know the board would receive a different narrative first. Manila folders, 12 of them, each containing an executive summary tied to evidence. I kept the language plain. Duty of care is not optional. Duty of loyalty is not discretionary. Liquidation disguised as agility still leaves bones. As the sun crossed the window line in my office, I took a final walk around the floor I might not visit again in this form. Through glass, I watched a junior engineer practice a demo with the careful pride of someone who believes their work can matter to a patient they will never meet. I paused in the clinical suite to listen to the hum of machines that had become familiar to me as a heartbeat. Those rooms taught me a truth our industry forgets when the markets are clapping. The distance between a well-run lab and a saved life is smaller than the distance between a brilliant slide and a broken promise. At 5:10, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. The voice was smooth, trying not to sound hurried. Bryce's legal team. They were prepared to offer an enhanced severance package, very enhanced, in exchange for an immediate signature on a comprehensive NDA, no board appearance, no contact with employees, the kind of old-world deal that tries to turn a truth into a sealed envelope. I asked for terms in writing by 8 a.m. and hung up. Margaret called minutes later, already anticipating my answer. "You aren't considering." "Not in substance," I said, "but let them think they're winning. Overconfidence is a generous accountant." Before I left, I took out my grandmother's journal, the one with the stiff black cover she used when banks still asked women for co-signers. Her handwriting is the clearest thing I own. Power isn't about what you show, darling. It's about what you hold in reserve. The moment they know everything you have, you've already lost. She survived by making rooms underestimate her. I built a company by making rooms forget to fear me. In the morning, I would let the room learn both lessons. I turned off the light and stood for a moment in the doorway, watching the office in reverse. The long table where we'd celebrated our first FDA clearance. The whiteboard still shadowed with the chemical syntax one of our fellows had diagrammed 3 nights earlier. The empty chair where Maria used to lean back when she found the right argument. Tomorrow would turn on a piece of paper and the oldest rule of leadership. It is not the person who speaks the loudest who owns the table. It is the person who built it, paid for it, and, if necessary, can carry it out of the room. The weekend arrived like a staging ground. Friday night, when most of the city was winding down, I opened a map of Bryce Holloway's career as if it were a battlefield. Every LinkedIn connection, every golf partner, every lieutenant imported from previous companies. Names and lines linking into a predictable web. His pattern was devastatingly consistent. Arrive with fanfare. Preach transformation. Clear out those with experience, especially women over 35. Replace them with men who owed their rise entirely to him. Within 6 months, the old guard was gone, lawsuits were filed, NDAs signed, and the company was positioned for an exit opportunity. To the press, it looked like reinvention. To the people inside, it felt like arson disguised as spring cleaning. I spent hours pulling court filings from his last company, MedTech Solutions. Buried in the digital archives were wrongful termination suits, each one sealed, each one ending in confidential settlements. The legal architecture ensured silence, but patterns always leave residue. I built a timeline on my wall, colored lines stretching across 3 companies, each marked with sudden spikes in turnover among female executives, minorities, older staff. He had perfected a strategy of plausible deniability. Performance issues documented retroactively, restructurings that somehow only affected certain demographics. It was corporate Darwinism, but the environment had been rigged. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah Martinez, our VP of Human Resources, one of the few women still standing in senior leadership. She asked for a private meeting. We chose a cafe in Lodo, well outside Zenith's orbit. She arrived looking like she hadn't slept in days, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup as though to draw strength from the ceramic. "He's restructuring my department," she said, no preamble. "Bringing in his own HR chief from MedTech. I've been reassigned to special projects effective Tuesday." She slid a USB drive across the table. Every termination order, every overridden protocol. Patterns no one can ignore. I studied the small object between us. "Why give this to me? I'm already out." Sarah's laugh was brittle. "That's exactly why. You're the only one who hasn't signed the separation agreement. Legal flagged it. He's paranoid about why you're stalling." "Good," I said. "Let him wonder." The drive contained more than numbers. It was a map of discrimination dressed in corporate language. Pregnancy announcements flagged for timing concerns. Performance reviews rewritten after exits. Emails about culture fit that translated into a quiet purge of anyone who didn't look like Bryce's version of a future executive. It was evidence that efficiency was only the mask. Later that day, another message arrived, encrypted, unsigned. The CFO, James Wright, one of Bryce's hand-picked allies. Or so it seemed. His conscience, or perhaps his survival instinct, had caught up with him. The attachment was Bryce's full restructuring plan. 4 phases. Phase 1. Eliminate established leadership, 90% complete. Phase 2. Restructure for acquisition readiness. Phase 3. Shop intellectual property to buyers. Phase 4. Exit with golden parachute. Projected personal profit, $42 million. Projected job losses, 60% of Zenith's workforce. I read the words twice, my jaw tightening. Zenith wasn't a spreadsheet. It was 800 people. It was a cardiac monitoring system in development for 5 years, a device that could prevent thousands of deaths annually. To Bryce, it was inventory to be stripped and sold. Here, the historian in me stirred. American industry has known men like this for more than a century. In the Gilded Age, they were called robber barons. In the 1980s, corporate raiders. Today, they wear leaner suits and wield efficiency instead of hostile takeovers. But the story is the same. Strip the flesh from institutions built by others, extract profit, move on. Communities and workers become collateral damage in someone else's narrative of genius. Saturday evening, I pinned a new sheet to my wall, a flowchart of his liquidation plan, lines drawn in red ink. Under each phase, I wrote the names of real people. Engineers with children in school, scientists with mortgages, staff whose skill wasn't portable, who had given decades to Zenith because they believed in what we were building. Each line of his plan was another life destabilized. It wasn't abstraction anymore. It was arithmetic with blood in it. By Sunday, the picture sharpened. 3 separate contacts in my network confirmed Bryce had already begun informal meetings with venture capitalists, floating Zenith's intellectual property portfolio as if it were his personal auction block. The cardiac system, our crown jewel, was being packaged for quick sale, but the most damning evidence came from a place he trusted too much, his own circle. Even allies had limits. James Wright's leak was only the beginning. That afternoon, Sarah texted again. He's nervous. Keeps asking why you haven't disappeared. He thinks you're planning something. I wrote back, let him think that. Fear is leverage. I thought about the culture inside Zenith. The engineers still laboring over prototypes, the clinical teams recording patient trials, the assistants organizing data sets. They had no idea that their labor, their hopes, were being priced for liquidation. In moments like this, corporations stop being abstract entities. They become battlegrounds where 2 visions fight, the extractive and the generative. Bryce's playbook was extraction. Mine was stewardship. That night I added another passage to my grandmother's journal. Power without patience is just noise. Patience without power is just suffering. The art is to let arrogance reveal itself. She had built Carson Group in an era when women could not open bank accounts without permission, and she survived by documenting everything. I was doing the same, except my battlefield was digital. By Sunday evening, my evidence package was thickening. Sarah's USB drive, James Wright's leak, my own recordings, and the broader pattern traced across his career. Margaret had reviewed it all. This is bulletproof, she said over the phone. Then, after a pause, but Juliet, why wait? You could have stopped this days ago just by revealing your ownership. I looked out at the city lights, remembering Maria's quiet resignation, Rachel's tears in the parking garage, the humiliation each had endured before they were pushed out. Because it couldn't just be my word against his, I said. His own words will damn him. That's the war he's already lost. When I closed the call, I opened my email. Bryce had sent the final draft of his board presentation. Zenith 2.0, a leaner, more agile future. Us 23 displayed my photograph under the heading Successful Completions. He had already written my corporate obituary. He had no idea that Monday morning the board would be holding a different set of slides. Mine. I sat back. The weekend's map spread across my study walls. Every arrow, every quote, every projection now aligned into one truth. Bryce believed he was dismantling a company. He didn't realize he was assembling his own indictment. The fuse was lit. All I had to do was wait for the explosion. Monday morning arrived draped in the gray light of early autumn, the kind of muted dawn that makes glass towers look like they are holding their breath. At Zenith headquarters, the underground garage echoed with the low thrum of engines and the clipped footsteps of employees marching toward another week. On the 12th floor, the boardroom had been staged for performance. Polished wood table, projection screens glowing with the opening slide. Zenith 2.0, a leaner, more agile future. Bryce Holloway was in his element. His silver hair gleamed under recessed lighting, his gestures rehearsed to convey command without seeming authoritarian. To anyone unfamiliar with the documents sealed inside my manila folders, he might have looked like salvation. I slipped into Conference Room B just before the meeting, where Robert Marsh, the retired CEO who had once been my mentor, waited with weary eyes. He'd heard whispers from board members about Bryce's acquisition plans. His voice carried both urgency and regret. "It's worse than I thought," he said. "Apex Pharmaceuticals is circling. They want the patents, not the people." I placed a single folder before him and watched his face shift from curiosity to horror as he read. His words confirmed my strategy. This was no ordinary restructuring. It was a planned dismantling, the kind that leaves not just layoffs, but hollow shells where institutions once stood. When the main meeting began, I let Bryce take the stage first. There's an old rule of strategy: never interrupt an enemy while he is building his own gallows. His voice filled the room with a steady cadence. "As you can see," he said, gesturing toward graphs that soared in neat green lines, "our Q2 projections anticipate a 40% increase in operational efficiency." He called it efficiency. I thought of it as subtraction disguised as growth. Each line upward represented a person forced out, an expertise lost, a lab slowed. At first, the board leaned in, nodding. Numbers have a narcotic effect in such rooms. They erase the texture of lives into clean percentages. But then Patricia Huang, one of the longest-serving directors, raised her hand. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the manila folder I had placed in front of her earlier. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "before we continue, I believe we need to address this documentation." The room shifted as if the air itself thickened. Bryce's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he found his mask again. "Disgruntled ex-employee tactics," he dismissed, waving lightly. "I'm sure it's full of bitter accusations. This is why we need fresh leadership." But then David Kim, another director, interjected. His voice cut clean. "These aren't accusations. They're emails from your account, with your digital signature." The effect was immediate. Chairs creaked, papers rustled. The room's quiet hum sharpened into murmurs as directors flipped pages, scanning words that could not be unsaid. Snippets rose above the din, phrases like "pregnancy announcement," "perfect timing for performance concerns," and "older women won't fight back." It was as though each page stripped away a layer of his polish. Bryce strode toward Patricia, hand extended to seize the folder. She drew it back with calm precision. "I think you've read these once already," she said, her voice flat as glass. His posture shifted, shoulders squared, jaw tight. The room had seen enough leaders unravel to recognize the early tremors. Through the half-open door, I heard the scrape of whispers. It was my cue. I entered quietly, my black dress absorbing the light rather than reflecting it, and took my seat at the table as though I had never left it. Conversation stilled. "Juliet," Bryce said, voice coated in surprise. "I wasn't expecting you. I thought we'd agreed." "You agreed?" I said evenly. "I listened. There's a difference." And the board chairman, William Foster, cleared his throat, trying to salvage procedure. "Ms. Carson, while we value your contributions, this is a closed session." I slid the stack of remaining folders across the table, one by one, their weight thudding softly into place before each director. "Consider this my exit interview," I said. "Documented, thorough, illuminating." A silence settled over the room, the kind that comes before verdicts. Bryce tried to speak, but David Kim had already flipped to a particular page. His voice carried the words aloud, damning in their bluntness. The Carson woman will be gone before Q2, too ethical to see the knife coming. For a moment, no one moved. It is rare in corporate boardrooms to hear truth spoken so plainly. Bryce stammered, "This is out of context. Private strategic discussions about optimization," but Patricia cut him off, her tone sharp. "Is that what you call discrimination now? Optimization?" I reached into my portfolio and pulled out a small device. "Perhaps context will help," I said, pressing play. The recording filled the boardroom with the unmistakable sound of Bryce's voice. At the Whitmore dinner. His laughter was oily, his words deliberate. "Once I clear out the long-timers, we can triple profit in 6 months. Carson is the last obstacle. Smart enough to be dangerous, but too ethical to see the knife." A silence detonated. He blustered. "That could be anyone's voice." "Time-stamped, geotagged, metadata intact," I replied. Table 12. The salmon was excellent, by the way. The room began to tilt. Directors who had nodded through his slides now leaned away from him, as if proximity were liability. His lieutenants, those younger executives he had imported, glanced nervously at one another, calculating where their loyalty should end. Then William Foster turned to me, voice tight, "Ms. Carson, if these documents are authentic, what standing do you have here? You're no longer an employee." It was the moment I had prepared for. I withdrew a single page from my leather portfolio and laid it before him. "Perhaps I should clarify," I said. "I am not here as a former employee. I am here as the majority shareholder of Zenith Labs. 53% through Carson Group." The words struck like a hammer. The board froze. Bryce's face drained of color. "Impossible," he choked. "The shareholder registry shows exactly what I wanted it to show," I said. "Shell companies, legal structures. My grandmother taught me well. You spent so much time studying my weaknesses, you never bothered to ask who actually owned the ground you were standing on." The chairman's hands trembled slightly as he read the ownership documentation. Across the table, Robert Marsh leaned back, a small nod of confirmation in his eyes. "This is entrapment," Bryce snarled. "You let me make decisions, implement changes. I let you reveal yourself," I said. I held up the unsigned severance agreement he had assumed I'd already executed. "You wanted me gone. I said I'd consider. I never signed, which means I am still Chief Strategy Officer. And according to Section 47, subsection C of Zenith's bylaws, in the event of CEO misconduct, the CSO may assume temporary control pending review." The words hung in the air. For a heartbeat, all I heard was the soft whir of the projector fan. Then Robert Marsh spoke. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in CEO Bryce Holloway." "Seconded," Patricia said, her voice steel. Bryce sputtered, red creeping up his neck. "This is a coup. You can't—" I looked directly at him. "It's not a coup when the shareholders are reclaiming what was theirs all along." The boardroom, once his theater, had become his trial, and the verdict was about to fall. The silence that followed Robert Marsh's motion was the heavy kind, thick, pressurized, the kind that makes every shuffle of paper sound like a drumbeat. Then, slowly, 12 hands rose around the table. Not one abstention, not one murmur of hesitation. The motion carried unanimously, a vote of no confidence. William Foster's voice, measured but strained, delivered the final words. "Mr. Holloway, your termination is effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." Bryce's composure cracked like porcelain dropped onto stone. He gathered his laptop with shaking hands, eyes darting toward me as if some miracle of reversal might still arrive. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think this changes anything? There are a dozen more like me ready to take my place." I met his stare, calm as a still lake. "Perhaps, but they'll think twice before trying it here." 2 security officers appeared at the doorway. Professional, quiet, efficient. They flanked him, waiting. Bryce's voice pitched into fury. "This is entrapment. I'll sue. You'll hear from my lawyers." "By all means," I replied, sliding another document across the table. Discovery should be fascinating. The cease and desist order, already filed, would keep him from contacting employees, accessing systems, or interfering in any way. His face purpled as he realized every path had been anticipated. The boardroom exhaled once he was gone, tension draining like air from a punctured tire. The perfect slides still glowed on the projector, but now they looked like exhibits in a trial, rather than a blueprint for the future. Papers lay scattered, directors whispered in uneasy clusters, and for the first time in months, the illusion had been broken. Yet the story did not end with Bryce's removal. Power, once revealed, demands stewardship. As I left the boardroom, my phone vibrated. An urgent call had been routed through the reception desk. Victoria Langford, General Counsel at MedTech Solutions, Bryce's former employer. Her voice was cool steel. "I hear you've just terminated Mr. Holloway. Congratulations, you've just inherited our problem." She spoke of sealed settlements, ongoing investigations, the Department of Labor inquiries that had stalked his tenure. "If you need documentation," she said, "I'll courier it within the hour." For the first time, I felt the solidarity of unseen allies, women who had waited years for someone to stop him. But the real reckoning was downstairs, not in the boardroom. Word had traveled fast through Zenith's halls. When I stepped into the main lobby, hundreds of employees were gathered, engineers in lab coats, assistants with clipboards still in hand, accountants, receptionists, interns. Conversations stilled when I appeared. Phones lifted, recording. The marble floor reflected a sea of uncertain faces. Confusion mingled with hope, fear with something like anticipation. I climbed a step and let my voice carry without a microphone. 45 minutes ago, Bryce Holloway walked into the boardroom as CEO of Zenith Labs. 5 minutes ago, he was escorted out. Gasps, then a wave of murmurs. Relief flickered across faces like candles in a draft. I lifted a hand, steadying the crowd. But this isn't about one man's fall. It's about the future of this company, and about the truth that leadership without conscience is nothing but tyranny with better tailoring. I saw Rachel Chen in the crowd, the woman who had left in tears weeks earlier. Her eyes widened, wet with disbelief. "Effective immediately," I continued. "All terminations from the past 6 weeks are under review. If you were forced out, manipulated into resigning, or pushed aside under false pretenses, your cases will be reopened. We want you back." The applause was thunderous, rolling across the lobby until the walls seemed to vibrate. People clapped not only for reinstatement, but for recognition that their pain had been seen. I waited, then spoke again, quieter, forcing them to lean in. "For the past 7 years, I have held majority ownership of Zenith Labs through Carson Group. I kept it hidden because I wanted to work beside you, not above you. But Bryce reminded me that sometimes power must be visible to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Yes, I own 53% of this company, and I promise you this. As long as I hold even a single share, no one will ever again use Zenith as a personal piggy bank or as a weapon of discrimination." A ripple of silence followed. People processed the revelation, eyes wide, jaws slack. Then came something louder than applause. Cheers, unrestrained, raw. Relief cracked into celebration. Sarah Martinez stepped forward from the throng. "What about the acquisition plans? The restructuring?" she called out, voice strong despite weeks of exhaustion. "Canceled," I answered. "We are not for sale. We are not downsizing. We are going back to what we do best, creating technology that saves lives." The crowd surged with renewed clapping, laughter, even tears. For weeks they had bent beneath a storm. Now The clouds had broken. Around me, I caught fragments of whispered conversations. An engineer showed a colleague a photo of a patient alive today because of Zenith's prototype monitor. An administrative assistant muttered, "I can breathe again." The small details mattered. They proved the stakes had never been abstract. And then, like every great turning point in history, the moment solidified into ritual. Phones captured it. Stories began to spread before I had even finished speaking. By nightfall, every employee would know, and by morning, so would the press. I stepped down, my voice carrying one final time. We will rebuild this company, together, and we will remember what nearly happened here, not as a scar, but as a compass. The applause swelled again, not the polite corporate clapping of boardrooms, but something human, collective, defiant. In that moment, Zenith Labs was not just a company. It was a community reclaiming its soul. The boardroom battle was over. But the harder war, the slow daily work of repair, was just beginning. The building felt different by late afternoon, though the walls were the same glass and steel. A kind of collective breath had been released, as though the air itself no longer carried the weight of dread. Yet victory in a boardroom is only the opening act. What comes after, the repair, the rebuilding, is where history measures leadership. I returned to my office with a folder from IT waiting on my desk. Inside was a forensic record of Bryce's digital footprints, unauthorized downloads of proprietary files, attempts to access confidential research, encrypted emails to outside parties. Each entry was a tile in a mosaic of corporate espionage. Lawyers would feed on it for years, but for me the lesson was immediate. Every lock that had been neglected needed to be rebuilt, every system hardened. I made a note. Vigilance is not paranoia when the stakes are survival. Margaret, my attorney, called next. The press has wind of it already, she said. TechCrunch, the Denver Business Journal, 6 blogs. They want statements. I dictated something spare and factual. Zenith Labs announces leadership transition following board review. Company remains committed to innovation and ethical business practices. No theatrics, no adjectives. Let the story tell itself. Bryce, of course, was already spinning. His LinkedIn profile now read, "Exploring new opportunities after successful restructuring of Zenith Labs." The man was shameless. I almost laughed. Let him polish his narrative. History had already written the footnote. I walked the labs that evening, floor by floor. In the cardiac research unit, Dr. Angela Wu bent over a prototype, her face lit by the glow of monitors. "Shouldn't you be home?" I asked. She glanced up, adjusting her glasses. "First time in 6 weeks, I've worked without looking over my shoulder, wanted to savor it." She hesitated, then added, "Is it true that you own the company?" 53%, I answered. "All this time, you could have pulled rank. Why didn't you?" I considered the question. The truth felt simple. Because leadership earned is worth more than leadership inherited, and because I needed to see who people really were when they thought I was powerless. Angela nodded slowly. "You know, he tried to kill the cardiac project, said it wasn't profitable enough." I smiled grimly. "The project that could save thousands of lives annually." "Exactly that one," she said. Funny how all his pivots lined up with what would benefit Apex Pharmaceuticals. I made another note for the legal team. There were more threads to pull. Later, an intern appeared at my doorway, no more than 22, clutching a folder with nervous hands. "I'm Jessica Torres," she stammered. "Special Projects Team, Mr. Holloway's." The fear in her voice was palpable. "It said to deliver this to you." I softened my tone. "Jessica, you're not in trouble. Anyone below director level will be evaluated based on their work, not their associations. We don't punish people for surviving." Her shoulders sagged with relief. "He told us you were the enemy," she said, "that you were holding the company back with outdated thinking and emotions." She looked at me, steady now, but I think he was describing himself. I let the words settle. Out of the mouths of interns sometimes comes the clearest truth. As night fell, I returned to my journal. The leather was worn smooth at the corners, my grandmother's handwriting still anchoring the first pages. I wrote, "Power revealed is power diminished. Power concealed too long becomes complicity. The art is knowing when to show your hand." Today we showed ours. Tomorrow we rebuild. But rebuilding required more than words. Rachel Chen, operations chief forced out weeks earlier, came to my office after receiving her reinstatement call. She looked both exhausted and exhilarated. "HR wants me back, same position, same pay, even an apology." I said yes. "But Juliet, I need to know. This won't happen again. I can't go through another Bryce." I gestured to the chair opposite me. "What would it take for you to feel safe here again?" She considered, eyes sharp. "Transparency. Real protection for whistleblowers. A board that pays attention. And maybe leadership that doesn't hide in shadows, even for good reasons." "Fair points," I admitted. "That's why I'm proposing changes. Employee representation on the board. Anonymous reporting channels that bypass executives. Full disclosure of major shareholders. No more secrets, no more shadows." Rachel let out a breath she'd been holding for weeks. A small smile tugged at her mouth. "That's radical." "Radical times require radical responses," I said. "We almost lost everything to one man who weaponized corporate culture. If we don't change, we're only waiting for the next predator." For a moment, the weight of what lay ahead pressed in. Rebuilding wasn't just about reinstating jobs. It was about rewiring the DNA of Zenith Labs so that no single leader could ever again use its structure as a weapon. We would need to codify protections into governance, not just trust intentions. Institutions, like people, must learn from scars. When Rachel left, I stood at the window. Denver's skyline glowed against the fading light, towers lit like votives. In the streets below, the city carried on. Restaurants filling, buses rumbling, ordinary lives unfolding. But for 800 people inside this building, the day had been extraordinary. Their future had tilted in a single vote. A single moment when the narrative shifted from dismantling to rebuilding. Zenith Labs was no longer prey. It was a community that had survived an attempted gutting, and in surviving had discovered its backbone. The war against Bryce was over. The longer war for trust, for culture, for the integrity of what we built was only beginning. And it would be won not by silence, but by systems that remembered what silence had cost. Tomorrow, the real work would start. By dawn the next day, the building looked unchanged. Same steel skeleton, same glass skin, catching the mountain light. Yet inside, everything had shifted. What had been fear was now a kind of fragile determination. The scent of burnt coffee in the lobby carried differently, less bitter, as though the air had been ventilated. It reminded me that institutions breathe like people do. They hold tension in the walls, release it in whispers, exhale when relief comes. Maintenance workers were already removing Bryce Holloway's nameplate from the executive suite. His awards, polished to a mirror shine but earned mostly through theater, sat in a cardboard box waiting for delivery. The rituals of erasure are always quiet. Names scrubbed from directories, login credentials revoked, the photo on the website grayed out. In corporate history, the traces of men like him are usually buried under leadership transition press releases. But those of us who lived it knew the deeper story. Before noon, a package arrived by courier from Medtech's counsel, Victoria Langford. Inside were thick files, sealed settlements, Department of Labor inquiries, a trail of systemic abuse stretching across multiple companies. "We've been waiting for someone to stop him," her note read. "Use these as you see fit." For a moment I thought of all the women whose signatures on NDAs had sealed their silence. Their names weren't in the press, but their absence haunted every line. It made me realize something. Accountability doesn't end with removal. It extends backward to all the voices muted along the way. By afternoon, the lobby filled again. Employees who had been forced out under false pretenses returned to reclaim their badges. HR had been instructed to reinstate them with full compensation. Watching Maria step back into the building, her daughter clutching her hand, was more powerful than any boardroom motion. History isn't only made in policy, it's made in small scenes like this, when someone wronged is welcomed home and the community bears witness. In the executive hallway, I paused outside the corner office that had once been the throne of power. It overlooked the Rockies with a view so commanding it distorted perspective, making one feel larger than the company itself. That was why I chose to dismantle it. This will become a wellness room, I told facilities. The best view belongs to everyone, not one person. Some traditions are broken not by policy, but by repurposing their symbols. As the days unfolded, new structures began to take shape. Employee-elected board representatives. Anonymous reporting systems routed past the executive layer. Mandatory disclosure of major shareholders. Radical changes for a corporate culture raised on discretion and hierarchy, but necessary. The past weeks had taught us that silence and secrecy are not neutral. They are accomplices. At night, I wrote in my journal again, adding to my grandmother's entries with a hand steadier than I felt. The best revenge isn't in the fire you set. It's in the house you rebuild stronger with better locks and alarms so no arsonist can return. I thought of her, a woman who built an investment firm in an age when women could not even open credit cards. She had concealed her power until the moment concealment no longer served. I had done the same. But now the concealment was over. Transparency would be the inheritance I passed forward, and still the broader reflection pressed on me. Men like Bryce are not anomalies, they are patterns. In the Gilded Age, they were called barons. In the 1980s, raiders. Today, they cloak themselves in jargon about agility and disruption, but behind every buzzword lies the same hunger. Extract, hollow out, move on. The war we fought here will be fought again elsewhere. The best we can do is to leave a record, to show that resistance is possible, that documentation is a weapon sharper than charisma. On Friday, a young engineer stopped me in the hallway. He couldn't have been more than 25, his badge still new, his voice tentative. "Ms. Carson," he said, "people are saying what you did saved the company. But how did you know when to act?" I smiled, remembering my grandmother's script. "Because timing is the difference between noise and history," I told him. "Power is knowing when to wait and when to strike." That evening, the building was nearly empty. I walked once more through the lobby, its marble floors reflecting the soft glow of evening. The security guard on duty, Thomas, nodded to me. His daughter worked in accounting. "Hell of a week, Ms. Carson," he said. "That it was, Thomas," I replied. He smiled, a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of a family's livelihood. About time someone remembered what this place was built for. As I stepped into the night, Denver stretched before me, ordinary and eternal. Somewhere, Bryce Holloway was likely pitching himself as a visionary to another boardroom. Somewhere else, another company was unknowingly setting the stage for its own reckoning. But here, at Zenith Labs, we had written a different ending. History doesn't only remember the predators. Sometimes it remembers the people who refused to be prey.